heaven the start to take your stride, step in your plan with redemption sign. Resurrected, now alive, heaven's story made known. So when it's hard, I'll still believe through the battle we'll go. When the valley's the only way, there is a light that will never fade. I know you will be leading me on. So faith, keep me loving, and love, keep me running that beautiful race, running that beautiful race, running that beautiful race, running that beautiful race. Governments and galaxies, I know you have control. So take the faith inside of me, Lord, I pray it will grow. 'Cause the love of God is evergreen and does not melt as the snow. So when it's hard, I still believe through the battle we'll go. When to fight is the only way, there is a name. Sing Jesus, leading me on, yeah. So faith, keep me fighting, and love, keep me running, running that beautiful race, running that beautiful race, running that beautiful race, running that beautiful race, yeah. We're running up to God this morning, aren't we? Yeah. I wanna keep running up to heaven's door. 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 So help me keep running up to heaven's door. Help me keep running up to heaven's door. So help me keep running up to heaven's door. Yeah. So faith, keep me fighting, and love, keep me running, running that beautiful race, running that beautiful race, running that beautiful race, running the beautiful race, yeah.
Welcome to church today. It is so good that you are joining us here in Freedom Church, wherever you're joining us from, whether it's your living room, whether it's your car, whether it's a venue, wherever it's at. It is so fantastic that you chose to be with us today. My name's Karen, part of the leadership team here in Freedom Church, based here in Hereford in the UK. Welcome.
And I'm Chris, and it's great to have you here today, particularly if this is the first time that you've joined us. We love having new people tap into what we're doing. So if you're streaming in for the first time today, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
We're ready for a fantastic event today. All of our events are great, but this one today, at the beginning of 2023, February 2023, we want to look at a couple of our DNA. And we have 12 DNA as a church, which are like our core values. And we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail today. We saw 2 in January. We're going to see another 2 now in February. And we're really excited to show you that. But one of my favorite DNAs is wildfire. It's about expressing outwardly what God has done inwardly. It's about that, oh my gosh, someone's died for me, he saved me, and I can't help but shout and clap and dance. And if you're here for the first time, or if you've been a part of Freedom for ages, join us today. Come on, let's have a bit of wildfire passion. If you've never clapped before, let's see you clapping. If you never raised your hands, maybe you want to raise your hands. Let's join in that wildfire together today.
One of the things that people comment on with our church is it's raw, and there is a rawness that comes when we come together. But when our men come together, there is a raw passion that is unleashed. And at the end of last year, I had the joy of being able to be in the room when we gathered some of our men together and created a new album. And that comes out 24th of February. You can pre-order that, make a link so that it comes towards you. It also changes the algorithms so that in social media world, we rise up the table. And you know what? We have a track that from a previous album that has had 1.6 million downloads. How incredible is that? So what if Chariots, Purify, the two singles we've already released, and now the album also rise up the charts, and people get to hear that raw passion that is a part of who we are and what God's given us.
Wildfire runs through every aspect of our lives, and we're going to watch a creative now that has been made by our team that will stir the fires of passion and creativity before we go into worship. Let's look at this creative.
Take me to the kingdom people, the everything for his glory people, the first to arrive, last to leave people. My life around his plans people, the behind closed doors, on their knees people, the surrender and start again people, the know there's always more people, the unshakable, faithful, forever people, the called, convicted, courageous people, the grateful, generous, steadfast people, the step up and take a lead people, the bride beautifiers, the warfare wagers, the church builders, the seed sowers, the truth speakers, the giant slayers, the pass it on better than we found it people. Take me to my people and let me stand beside them, hands on earth and eyes on heaven. Put me with your people and we will charge together to see your kingdom come.
Wow, that stirred the fire. Oh my gosh, I love that video so much. It's who we are as a church.
Yeah.
And now, guys, are you ready? We're going to go in and have a time of worshiping the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. Let's go.
Some may trust in chariots, but not us. We will trust in the one who holds the universe. Some may trust in their own strength, but not us. We will trust in the one who raised the dead. Yeah! Some may trust in chariots, but not us. We will trust in the one who holds the universe. Yeah! Some may trust in their own strength, but not us. We will trust in the one who raised the dead. Yeah! So why should I fear? What can the others do to me? When your voice is made clear by the King who rides ahead of me. In your love, no one's forsaken. Creation cries out, yeah. flesh, but not us. To our souls singing, we will not be slaves again. Some may lift you, build their thrones, but not us. We will, come on, sing it out. Give glory to the King. Yeah. So why should I fear? What can big mortals do to me? When your ways is made clear by the King who rides in me. In your love, no one's forsaken. Creation cries out. Your kingdom cannot be shaken. You're waking up this warrior. Hey! You're waking up this warrior. See your kingdom cannot be shaken. You're waking up this warrior. Nothing's gonna hold us down. No, nothing's gonna hold us down as we take it back from the King and crown. No, nothing's gonna hold us down as we take it ground for the King. Taking ground, come on. No, nothing's gonna hold us down as we take it ground for the King and crown. No, nothing's gonna hold us down as we take it ground. Lift it up. No, nothing's gonna hold us down when we take it ground for the King and crown. No, nothing's gonna hold us down as we take it ground for the King and crown. No, nothing's gonna hold us down as we take it ground for the King and crown. No, nothing's gonna hold us down. No, nothing's gonna hold us. So I walk up to the battle line where you meet you in your son, and you place it in your sinner's hands, and you say that thank you. Despite of all my weaknesses, I'm giving us all. Turn the world as darkest shout. The battle is the Lord. The battle is the Lord. The battle is the Lord. Come on. The battle is the Lord. 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 He is the King of glory. Come on, louder! He is the King. Oh, he is the King. Come on. He is the King of glory. The Lord God strong and mighty. He is the King. Come on. He is the King. Lord God strong and mighty. He is the King. He is the King. Lord God strong and mighty. He is the King. Yeah. No, nothing's gonna hold us down when we take it down to the King and crown. No, nothing's gonna hold us down if we take it down to the King and crown. No, nothing's gonna hold us down 'cause we take it down for the King and crown. No, nothing's gonna hold us down.
We will lift our eyes. We won't fear the fight. There is one who's stronger. Pressed on each side, we will not lose sight of the one who's greater. Come on, sing it out. One name holds every victory. One voice that silences the enemy. One king, one king. are taking ground, walls are falling down in the mighty name of Jesus. And again, one day, one voice that silences, one king who reigns for all. Father, we thank you that every victory is yours. Every victory, in every way. Father, for justice, for peace, for unity, for healing, for breakthrough. It's yours, Lord. Every victory is yours. Every victory is yours. You rose. You reign. Death is buried in the grave. Hell cannot define me. You rose. You reign. Every victory is yours. Every victory is yours. You rose. Death is buried in the grave. Hell cannot defy your reign. You rose. You reign. One day, come on, one day. Come on, lift it up. One voice that silences the enemy. Let's go. King who reigns for all. Jesus. One day, come on, one day. One king who reigns. Jesus. One day, one day. Silences the enemy. One king who reigns. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus,
I was watching you through that camera, raising your hands, doing a bit of a dance, getting your wildfire passion on. Fantastic. What a great time of worship this morning. Well, now we're going to be going into the very first of our DNA videos. Warrior Poet is one of our DNA. It's all about creativity. Who better to deliver this message than Saz Thomas, our campus pastor in Charleston, America. It's going to be great.
Have you ever had a meal that's moved you? I'm sure you have. Think about it. It's, you know, the perfect environment, maybe the restaurant that you love. The food's hot and it's flavors you've never had before, and you've got your best friends at the table storytelling. Or what about this? Have you ever been to a concert or a gig or an event where the music just is electric? You can't help but put your hands in the air. There's fire in the room and people are all singing along. You know that moment, and you just feel like your whole body is happy. Maybe you've been to an art gallery. I don't know, one of your favorite art galleries in your area, and you're 4 or 5 meters back on a bench in a busy room with lots of people, but the painting in front of you tells you a story that you're captivated by. It makes you feel, it makes you question, and it moves you. We've all had these moments where creativity break down our day, they break down our feeling or the moment we're in or the pain we're in or the story we're living right now, and it tells you something, but it doesn't just tell it to your mind, it tells you deep to your soul. Creativity has that power. It's got the power to break down cultures and ways of thinking and ways of feeling and speaking deep within us. You see, that's a God thing. God's the original creator. You see in the Bible in Genesis, he's the Alpha and the beginning, and he speaks into the nothingness. He speaks into the soup of emptiness, the void, the blackness, the darkness. And as he speaks, when everything is monochrome, when everything is void of light, when life is dark, God speaks color, and he speaks creativity, and he calls out life and fullness and love and relationship and animals and plants and all the rest. You see, he's the ultimate creator. But not only do you have God in Genesis, you have Jesus. And Jesus was a carpenter. He was a sculptor of material. He loved wood, and he chiseled and hammered and created and honed and formed all kinds of things in his trade. And then you've got the Holy Spirit, and you see through the Bible the Holy Spirit comes as fire and as a dove, and he comes in the wind, and he ministers in so many different forms. You see, God's creative. You see, we're called to reflect the Creator, to embrace and express his story and his life. You see, in Genesis, it also says this. It says in Genesis 1 verse 27, let's make human beings in our image. It also says, let's make human beings in our nature. You see, for some of you, or some of us, we've written ourselves off from this DNA, because Warrior Poet is about creativity. And maybe all you can draw is a stick man and you can't sing like me. But creativity isn't just about a skill, a job. It's not about a profession or paid employment. Creativity is simply expressing. It's the ability to take a story, a moment, a feeling, and for it to be expressed. And by nature, every human being has this ability to express. You don't have to spend much time with a toddler, a 2-year-old whose chocolate bar has finished, to realize that they've got some very definite feelings and an expression about what they're feeling. The thing is, all of us have it. And so this isn't a DNA that you can attribute to our Sunday events and the music we play. It's not a DNA that lives in certain people and not in others. Because when God said he made you in his likeness, he said to you, he made you creative. He made you to be just like him, to express and to embrace creativity. Most of us will watch films. Most of us will appreciate art or listen to music. Why? Because every single one of us is creative. Now, if you go to the Old Testament, the first person in the Bible to receive the Spirit of God was a builder. Yes, a builder, not, a religious leader or an academic. It was a builder. More specifically, it was a craftsman. And this craftsman, in Exodus 35 verse 31, it said, the Lord filled him with the Spirit of God and gave him great ability in many crafts. God gave him knowledge and wisdom and understanding. And in this moment, in the Old Testament, God is filling people, he's filling craftsmen, he's filling men to build the temple, to work in gold and stones and wood and sculpting and color and fabrics. Because in the Old Testament, God wanted to write a story of meeting with humanity. He built these temples as a place where he would come down and change lives. The temple was the place where people were forgiven. It's the place where people were healed. It's the place where people learned about God. It was the place where he wrote stories on humanity and he gave them direction and purpose and a journey to take. In the New Testament, that temple isn't a building anymore. So for us, the place where God meets us, the place where God meets the world and heals people and saves people and forgives people is us. It's inside us. And no longer does God need a craftsman to build a building to hold his presence and his power. Now, God crafts us as the very building that he's going to inhabit. And so we are, by design, creative. We're by design the place with which he's going to breathe his color into the monotony and the mundaneness that we see around us. You see, the color of our lives is a revolt against the mundane. There's an abundance of creativity out there. You only have to spend a moment on Netflix or Apple Music or Spotify or online to see that creativity isn't in short supply. But in all that creativity, is there color that's hopeful? Is there a message that says there's healing? Is there a message of love? You see, there is plenty of creativity in the world, plenty of it. But what you have living inside of you is a color and a message for the world that's hopeful, that's light. God calls us light. We're to be a light to the world. And every single one of us has a unique way of expressing. No one in the world will tell a story the way you do. No one will joke like you do. No one will sing like you do, or put out the Instagrams that you put out, or tell stories and retail journeys that you've been on the way you do. Because you're completely and utterly unique. You're the creative vessel with which God wants to tell the gospel, and you do it different to anybody else. But I think sometimes we feel like we have to fit in. We feel like we have to look like other people, dress like other people, talk like other people, express ourselves like other people, but God's put something in you that's completely different. The color of your life is a vaccine to the world's monochrome nature. Because there's something about you that's different to other people, and that's not a skill thing. That's not to do with being an artist or a musician or an actor or a dancer. That's to do with being a parent, being a friend who gives gifts, being someone who owns a home and hosts parties, maybe cooks a meal for friends. You see, creativity isn't capped or held or boxed by skill and the traditional arts. Creativity is the expression of love and the expression of a story for someone else to receive. And for some of us, that looks like making a film or singing a song. And for some of us, it looks like opening our home and laying on a meal, or playing imaginative stories with our children, or going to a ballet class, or an evening class, or a painting class. It doesn't have to look like the boxed, stereotypical idea of what it means to be creative. You see, the greatest message you have, the greatest message that every single one of us has to speak out is the gospel. You've got the gospel alive in you. You have a testimony. It says in Revelation, we overcome the enemy with the word of our testimony. You see, each of us have got this living gospel inside of us. The thing is with the gospel is it's not trapped by some kind of era. It's not stuck in some kind of musical genre. It's not bound by the design or the way that a film should be. It's not an action, it's not a romantic comedy. It breaks all the boundaries of these kind of boxes that we put art in. The gospel as a story has stood the test of time. It's lived through the ages. It's gone through medieval drama that happened into the street, onto the stage, and now it's in film. The gospel is just, it's stood the test, and it's weathered the storm where art and expression has changed all around it. It's stayed true. Why? Why is the gospel still shared? Because it's alive. It's a story and a power that's alive. And it lives in you. You see, the thing is with this story, the thing is with this gospel, with the saving power of Jesus, the love of Jesus, the forgiveness of Jesus, the way that He saved you, the way that He's healed you, the way that He's provided for you, all those things that the gospel has done in you are not designed to stay inside of you. We will communicate the gospel with the life and the color with which it was intended. We will communicate its vibrancy and its story. And so wherever you are, I want to ask you this question. How does your life tell the gospel? How does your life reflect what God's done? Do you sit down with a friend over coffee and tell stories of church, or tell stories of meeting God on a mountaintop, or tell stories of God meeting you in your pain or your loss? You see, we have stories deep inside of us that need to be told. We have a gospel story that has got to come out of us. And for some of us, it'll come out in song. It'll come out in an Instagram photo. It'll come out in a play or a book or a poem. But for some of us, where those are not our methods of expressing, do not get trapped in thinking that creativity is something you can't do. Host a meal. Wear something different. Play with your children in an imaginative way. Romance your husband and wife in a way that you've never done before. Make it creative. Throw a party. Honor your friends. Give a present. Whatever it is, we're called to this life of vibrancy. We're called to share the gospel in ways they've never been shared before. And here's the thing. Every single one of us is creative. We're made in the nature of God. Every single one of us is a place that God fills in order to tell His story and meet other people. And every single one of us has the ability to share the gospel in a new and creative way, because we are sent into all the world to change the lives of our neighbors, our family, our friends, our work colleagues, the students alongside us, whoever is around you. So I'm asking you, let's reflect the Creator in embracing and expressing creativity. Let's live a life of color so that we can revolt against the mundane, and let's communicate the gospel with the life and vibrancy with which it was intended.
Wow, how astonishing was that preach, that explanation by Saz. That is such a landmark description of that DNA. And one of the other DNA that we have, we call relevant to our time. We're a church who are determined to stay relevant, not stuck in old ways, not stuck in old methodologies. We have a timeless message, but the methodology can change. We need to be relevant to this time. And who better to explain that than Saz's husband, Dave Thomas, and he's going to speak to us now about the DNA relevant to our time.
A number of years ago, me and my wife Saz, we were at a wedding of some friends of ours, and they're not Christians, they're not believers, but they decided to have a traditional church wedding. And we were there with a whole bunch of friends and family that we love and we care about and we've shared our faith with, we've invited to church, and a couple of them actually become Christians, and that's amazing, but the vast majority of them haven't taken that step yet. And even though we knew that it was going to be a different kind of service to the one we would have in Freedom, we were praying and saying, God, could you use it? Would you speak? Would you move? And it was a beautiful moment seeing our friends get married in this amazing church. But honestly, as we went through this service, I found myself getting really frustrated. And it's not that I've got a problem with people worshiping God in more traditional ways, and it's not that I don't think he could have moved, but as we went through this service with all of the rituals and the different things, it just was so out of touch and so irrelevant to these people that I cared about. And I thought, man, this is an opportunity that we've got to share the gospel with them in a way that matters, in a way that's going to make them think or question. And instead, as I looked around, I saw people nodding off and ignoring things and getting lost in the boredom of the moment, honestly. And as I got more and more frustrated, I needed to distract myself, so I started to look out of these beautiful stained glass windows. And as I was there, I thought to myself, God, this must frustrate you. And when we see Jesus in the Bible talking to people getting stuck in religious traditions or thinking, his response is strong. But instead of kind of getting in on my frustration, God asked me a question in this moment as I stared out of this window that I'll never forget. And he said, Dave, what's going to be your stained glass window then? It literally stopped me in my tracks. There in this moment, God was challenging me and saying, you're just as vulnerable about getting stuck in an area of thinking something so precious that you want to hold on to it the way you do church, and it could cost the generations you're trying to reach. At the time, Freedom, we were just getting momentum. We were starting to film things, starting to stream online, new music, super modern. We were cool, it was different. And yet in this moment, God wasn't going to agree with my frustration. He was going to provoke me to think about where I was at. As we look across the last 2,000 years of church history, we see these amazing moments of where men and women get revelations and encounters with God, and they lead to revivals. And what's fascinating is often they're connected to technological revolutions. Even think about stained glass windows, an amazing advancement in technology at the time. And why did churches end up having all these stained glass windows? It was because the majority of the people then were illiterate. And so the church took images and pictures in order to preach the gospel. It was a relevant to its time way of connecting anyone anywhere to a life-changing relationship with Jesus. But if we look across church history and we see these revivals and these moments, and you go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, often they've petered out. And I think it's because so often we take these revelations that lead to revivals and these revolutionary ways of doing church, and then we repeat them until they become relics. And this isn't about any particular denomination. The reality is God was saying that to me, for me and our church, because so often we get stuck as Christians. We get stuck in our preferences and our presumptions. If I had 100 people that regularly go to church and I ask them, why are you part of the church you're a part of? I can almost guarantee you I'll get a preference-based answer. Oh, I really love the music, or I love the way the preacher speaks, or I love meeting God in a building like ours. But the problem is that when we build church based on our preferences, it's one of the surefire ways that we're going to become irrelevant at some time, because there'll be something that's precious to us that we're not willing to let go of. Or maybe we build churches based around our presumptions, well, God's moved like that before, he's going to move like that again. And yet we've already heard in the changing DNA, in the warrior poet DNA, that we worship a God that's constantly on the move. He's the author and the creator of all innovation and creativity. And yet, as the church, we pat ourselves on the back for doing the same thing year in, year out, decade in, decade out, century in, century out. And yet we're missing and losing people as we do it. You see, I believe living relevant to our time is about exchanging our preferences and our presumptions for purpose. The purpose of reaching people. You see, I'm not saying that our preferences are wrong, but if they get in the way of reaching people, then we've got to become willing to lay them down. In fact, not just willing, maybe even passionately, regularly, aggressively laying them down. Because what really matters the most is not that I get to worship God the way I like or the way I have a preference or presumption. It's actually reaching my family and friends with the hope of the gospel of Jesus. You know, in the New Testament, there is this amazing revolutionary called Paul. And he writes most of the New Testament, these letters to the churches. And, you know, Paul grew up in an incredibly religious environment. Talk about preferences, talk about presumptions. This guy had a list longer than anybody. But when Jesus took a hold of his life, when the gospel took a hold of his life, all of that went out the window. He even says in one of his letters, what I used to count as gain, I now count as loss. In other words, my preferences, my presumptions, they don't matter anymore. All that matters is knowing Jesus and making him known. Even Paul, in the early years of the church, had to write to some of the early church leaders and challenge them about where they were falling into rituals and historic traditional things and somehow choking out the truth of the gospel. I love these words of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 that give us such a picture of what it is to live relevant to our time, to exchange our preferences, our presumptions for purpose. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law to win them. To those not having the law, I became like them to win them. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people by all possible means so that I might save some. I do this all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share in its blessing. You see, Paul is radically teaching us about what it means to be relevant to our time. He's laying down preferences, laying down presumptions, never once compromising on the truth of God, but reaching people, going beyond even what he was comfortable with, even what he'd known before. You know, Paul would have learnt new skills, maybe even new languages, would have understood cultures, all for the purpose of reaching people, because that's what the gospel's all about. And yet so often for us, we're unwilling to lay down our preferences. In fact, so often when I talk to people who've maybe left churches, so often it's because something's changed that they don't like now. Rarely do I hear Christians saying, I love my church because it's a style that I don't like, but it's reaching people. Rarely do I hear people saying, man, I love my church. It makes me so uncomfortable. It pushes me out of my comfort zone just so I can reach my neighbors. Oh man, I love my church. As soon as you think you've got it sorted, it changes, and it's always changing. And actually, I don't really know what's going to happen next year, but it's all to reach the next generation. That's the kind of church I want to be. That's the kind of church I dream about being. I hope that in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, our church has got a reputation still because we're doing church differently, but reaching people. But living relevant to our time is not about having a few more lights on our set on a Sunday. It's not about having a few more cameras, not about just filming and streaming online. It's actually about what relevance really means, being present in the moment and reaching people. It's about laying down our preferences, adapting our methods for the times and the cultures we're called to reach. I'll never forget, a few years ago, I went to visit our campuses in India and was having lunch with Luke and Sophie, who were part of our team and leaders on the ground in the early years. As we sat in this restaurant, they ate with their hands, much like people would do in India, and they were incredible at it. As I sat there with my knife and fork, I said, guys, that's amazing. And they said, yeah, well, we're Indian now, aren't we? And in just one small way, they laid down their preferences, laid down their presumptions, even laid down their own culture for the sake of reaching people that they've been called to. And those, what seemed like small steps, were huge when it came to making a statement of what they believed about the people that they were reaching and the willingness that they had to do whatever it takes. And yet for many of us, we've got our preferences around our time, even our own homes. With Firestarter, some of us, maybe we feel God calling us to do it, but we don't really like the idea of the hassle of letting people in our homes, tidying up after them. Maybe even the investment of, in refreshments that's going to come out of our own pocket. And after all, we got to ask, am I letting my preference drive how I want to do church? You see, being relevant to our time, yes, is about how we lead our church, but ultimately it's about how you live tomorrow and the day after. You see, you're the most relevant message that God has in your community. Maybe you're a parent at school, reaching other parents at school. You're the most relevant person to do it. Somebody at university, at college, a business owner. You are the relevant message Jesus has, but how stuck are you in your preferences, your presumptions? Are you the kind of Christian that when you start talking about church, you just reel off these words that your non-Christian friends have got no idea what they mean? You see, the church has lost the art of translation. Relevance will never be compromised. In being relevant to a time, I'm not talking about twisting or adapting or changing the word of God just to fit in with current trends or thinking. That would be the worst thing we could do. Instead, I'm talking about learning how to speak the language of the world in order to preach the gospel in a way that they can grasp and understand, rather than doing it out of our presumptions and preferences. You see, some of us are going to be called into leading industries, but we're going to be called to walk the tightrope of relevance without compromise. Relevance of the truth of God in a world that's running further and further away from it. But this is the kind of church God's called us to be. He's called us to be on the front lines. He's called us to be on the edge of innovation, not catching up to it. I believe that the church that's relevant to its time will see a revival that won't peter out, but it will keep rolling and get bigger. I believe a church that's relevant to its time will be a church filled with young people, because we will appeal to the next generation, for they're the now and they're the future. I believe a church that's relevant to its time will be able to go into any culture, cross any border, any time zone, any people group. That's the kind of church that's relevant to its time. That's the kind of church I want to be. That's the kind of Christian I want to be. But what about you? What are the preferences that you need to lay down? What are the presumptions you need to let God come in and renovate and revolutionize? We are called to be relevant to our time. Every single one of us. It's essential to reaching our world. It's essential to connecting anyone, anywhere, to a life-changing relationship with Jesus.
What a great event. Oh my gosh, those videos were so good. Thank you, Dave and Saz, for the messages that you've delivered. And thank you, every one of you, for being a part of our event today. We've loved having you join us wherever you are from. If you want to comment, if you want to respond in any way, we have an email address, hello@freedomchurch.cc. Please drop us an email. We'd love to hear from you. But otherwise, join us again, same time next week. Have the best week.
Have a good one, guys.
Yeah.